Welcome everybody, good to see such a good turnout. My name's Bill Long. I'm a farmer and a farm consultant based at Drossen on York Peninsula. My first job after graduating from Roseworthy was working with a plant protection consultant by the name of Alan Mayfield. And I know most, if not everybody, knows Alan. My role, my task was as a technical officer, probably a casual actually, just preparing signs and painting signs and writing herbicide names on signs for the work that Alan was doing at the Hart Field Day site. That work was probably the precursor to many of the tasks that the farming systems groups perform today. But essentially Alan was trialling a range of herbicides over a range of pulses. Back then it was a lot of vetch, some peas, some beans, might have been about it. I don't think there were too many growing chickpeas, we certainly weren't growing lentils. And a range of pasture species, because back in the early mid-80s period, we were very much in a cereal pasture system. So operating in a completely different environment to the one that we are today. In the late 1980s, we saw a plethora of new herbicides released, and over that late 80s, early 90s period, I remember going to many herbicide launches. There were probably 2, 3 a year of new products that were being released by chemical companies. And so at the same time, we saw the introduction of no-till systems. So we were changing from our cultivation-based systems into, knife point and press wheel systems. And while we were seeing the release of these chemical companies' products coming out, the labels would have statements around use in tillage situations. So here we were pioneering new herbicide products under new farming systems and trying to make sense of practices that weren't on a label that were being employed by farmers to use those herbicides effectively. We've seen since then new crops like lentils, and now we're dealing with disc farming systems. So knife points, while they're very common now, and no-till is the sowing system of choice. I guess disc systems are making way, and we have to relearn how to use some of these herbicides that are commonly being used. I guess the other thing that's changed in that nearly 30-year period, I guess, is that we now see fewer and fewer herbicides being released. We're not going to the product release sessions that we were in the 80s and 90s. And we're having to work out ways to use older herbicides in different ways. Often these herbicides are very dangerous to use. They really rely on crop tolerance and placement to make sure that we can use them safely. So that was the beginning. That was the reason the Hart site got going. It was trialling herbicides back in the 80s, and it's the reason many of the farming systems groups that have evolved since have evolved to really do the same thing, to look at herbicides, look how they behave in their patch. I know the beginning of the alkaline soils group was spurred by not only snails but also an interest in how some of the herbicides that were being trialled at Hart would behave on those really difficult alkaline soils on the southern part of the York Peninsula. So there's a lot of interest in herbicide work, and a lot of by farming systems groups. A lot of work's been conducted. There's been a lot of creativity in ways that we can use herbicides to manage weeds and use them safely in an environment that we can produce crops without damage. So today's session, the session over the next hour and a bit, we want to talk about the role of farming systems groups and the important role they play and being the platform, I guess, for a lot of the development of herbicides over the last 25 to 30 years in this state. In fact, while we have chemical companies working and spending millions of dollars investing in development of new products, I think the farming systems groups have played an absolutely key and vital role in assessing those products and in actually driving the herbicide companies to re-evaluate their labels, to reassess their labels, to rewrite their labels because of the creativity of people in this room that that work out that we need to use these products in a different way that's been described to us by the label. Because there are fewer products being released, and because a lot of the ones that we are playing with now are particularly dangerous, as I mentioned, we're relying on separation and plant tolerance to achieve our objectives. We need to be very careful about the work we do. And I guess some time ago we recognised the importance of making sure that we had permits in place and we followed guidelines and regulations and label statements. I think it's fair to say that, at least in South Australia, we might have been a little laxed in our approach to pesticide use compared to other states around the country, and particularly I think that even today, as the risk of litigation is ever growing, it seems, that we need to be even more vigilant about the approaches we take when we're playing with some of these very important products. So we want to talk about that. We want to talk about some of the legislation, some of the issues around the risks associated with doing this, how we go and use sort of unregistered products in a trial situation, and how farmers and advisors that are attending our field days might take that information home and apply it in the field. I've got to say that in my experience over the many years, there have been lots and lots of trials demonstrating no response to a herbicide that otherwise in the paddock would cause a lot of damage. And it surprises me that we have come so far without seeing farmers and advisors and farming systems groups end up in court, essentially, because there have been some disasters that have occurred in the field. And if it wasn't for the relationship that we have and the culture that we have within South Australia, within the farming systems groups and with the advisors that work with farmers, I think that a lot of the mistakes that have happened in the field over the years as we've developed new products might have ended up in court. And while there are a couple of cases I know that have, I think to our credit as an industry, that we have managed to avoid that. But let's have the discussion anyway. To say history says that we don't have to worry about that would be, I think, irresponsible. I think we need to think and have some discussion about that, and this is the group to do it, because we are leading the way as farming systems groups in developing herbicides and working with chemical companies and farmers and advisors. We'd also, the other point I want to make is that we're really good at looking at the agronomy of product use, and I think one of the things we neglect sometimes is to look at the implications of some of the residues that we're dealing with some of these pesticides. I'll give you a couple of examples of that. I mean, we've had, and I remember when we went from spray topping pastures to spray topping pulses for ryegrass control, and then look, 15 years ago I think we started spray topping cereals, and we soon got the message from some of the chemical companies saying, oi, just be careful about this because there are some residues that will be exceeded that will make the product unmarketable. You need to be very, very cautious of that. So things stopped for a while, but having said that, having a little hiatus for a while, there was a determination as the need arose to look at, again, some unregistered products or registered products being used in an unregistered way, and spray topping wheat with glyphosate as an example. Now we've got registration for use of that. There are MRLs established for glyphosate use in wheat for control of pre-harvest desiccation, but it's not the case in barley, and yet I'm aware that happens down the field. Absolutely it does, and let's not kid ourselves. There are some market implications with that, and that's because there are some residue limits that might well be exceeded by some of our purchases of barley from South Australia. So while the agronomy is fantastic, works really well, we can demonstrate that, prove that you can go and spray top barley safely at 45% moisture and there's no yield and quality loss, and we can not exceed the MRLs that have been established elsewhere, and even in Australia they might have been exceeded elsewhere in the world, and that means there's a limitation to the market access. There are other examples that perhaps some of our speakers might talk about that we're dealing with at the moment. Propizamide's an example, and I might get Kevin Bodnarak to touch on that. And at the moment I know we've got a situation with imidazole tolerant lentils, and while Sadi doing some fabulous work with some of the IMI-tolerant lentils, farmers want to use Group B herbicides like Glean, Lowgram and Ally in front of those crops, which won't be registered, aren't registered, so they can safely control medic and tares. And so we've had situations where we're doing the trial work, we've discovered there's some problems, but we're not even allowed to talk about it because of the registration litigation risks in doing that. And yet farmers have gone out and put out some of these Group B herbicides like Glean in front of lentils that have potentially caused some damage. That's happened this year. So there's an example of the need to have this discussion here and now, because, and this has happened many times before, but it's just it's what's happening on at the moment, and we need to have that discussion. So some of the questions I think we can answer in the next hour and a half or so. You know, how do we manage this use of pesticides, this development of pesticides, herbicides, whatever, fungicides, can be anything. But it's the stuff farmers use every day, the stuff that drives our groups, the stuff that attracts farmer clients to our field days, because that's what we want to know about. How can we do that in an environment that's safe, where we can discuss the fact that some of this stuff isn't registered, that there's a risk associated with it, and that we can do that safely so that people go away not taking home the wrong message, but are very clear about the risks and the risks associated with using some of these things when the permits aren't there. One thing I'm sure of is that farming systems groups do provide the platform to do this. If we leave this to chemical companies to do, they do a great job. They run their field day sites sometimes separately to the farming systems groups. So, you know, we've got companies that are putting out their specific trials, sites, and others are working with us. And some are doing both, you know, having their own dedicated field research centres and having some demonstration plots at the farming systems group sites as well. And one of the things I'm disappointed about today is that we had asked Jason Sabini to come along and have a chat to us about you know, the chemical company aspect, what they're looking for from farming systems groups and how they might work together and where they see us in this space. But here's an apology today. He's had to go in for some surgery. Anyway, so, but perhaps there's people here today that might like to pick up on that and ask some questions about how we might work with some of the some of the chemical companies. Some of the other questions are that, you know, we've been doing this for a long time. We seem to have worked it out as separate groups, but do we need a bit more coordinated approach? Something I'll ask you to think about as we go through the session. You know, would you like some support to coordinate this a little better, to make sure that we've got some standard sort of protocols in place to help help design some trials, to make sure we're addressing the issues that need to be addressed to fast track some registration process, for example. So, you know, maybe the important work that we do as individual groups can be coordinated a little better to try and fast track some of that. Yeah, so I guess to me this session is about mapping a way forward. It's not about trying to scare the pants off farming systems groups about the need for permits and, you know, doing everything right for fear of litigation. We are old enough and ugly enough, I think, and established enough now to have done that pretty well. But let's map the way forward. Let's think about some of the ways that we might develop this into the future so that we can improve the fantastic work that farming systems groups are doing already in driving our understanding for advisors and growers in the regions about herbicides and the safe use of herbicides in the future. We've got 3 speakers to address that issue today, and they've got about 20 minutes each. And then what we'll do after we've had the speakers is we'll just have a brief break, but I'll ask you to come back to your tables, have a bit of a discussion about what you've heard, and then we'll finish in the last 20 odd minutes with some discussion and some questions about what we've heard. Okay? So, to kick off the session, Mike McManus. Where's Mike? Up the back there. Welcome, Mike. Mike, where's your... Mike McManus from PIRSA, regulatory role within PIRSA, and I've asked Mike to come along and give us some discussion and a presentation on where PIRSA see farming systems groups working in this space and how we might go about the permits and registration process to make sure that we're able to do this in a safe fashion. So welcome, Mike. Over to you.